Hello, welcome to More Yoga with me, Emily. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have received a few requests for like a really juicy hip class. I know it sounds a little bit weird to put those two words together. But, you know, we've been spending perhaps a little bit more time at our desks or sitting down at home, and it would be nice to loosen up the hips a little bit. So I'm talking hip flexors, I'm talking glutes, probably hamstrings, maybe a little bit of quads. So essentially it's lower body, but all of those muscle groups attach across the hip joint. So loosening all of those, we can get into the hips a little bit more. Let's start in a really beautiful supine butterfly pose. For today, if you have blocks or tins or Tupperware containers, that's useful. This guy, a chip foam block or a rolled up blanket or towel just for padding or cushioning, but also a little bit of lift is going to be really useful as well. You can come down onto your back and maybe take a little wiggle from side to side first, because I know sometimes lying down on our backs, particularly on a hard floor, can feel a little bit, well, the body just needs to adjust. And then bring the soles of the feet together and take your knees out wide. So this is your basic butterfly pose. If you have pillows or blocks or something like that, you can use them to prop underneath your knees or thighs for a little bit more support, particularly if it's uncomfortable to have the knees lifted. Right? It just takes some of the gravity out of the posture. Some of you I know are going to be quite comfortable here for a long time. We're not going to be here super long, but go wherever you need to go, whatever depth feels good for you. And then arms can be by your side or out to the side or even overhead. You might have a cactus, right? Whatever, again, whatever feels good for you. Just because we're doing a hips class doesn't mean that we're not going to try and release tension elsewhere in the body as well. And for 3 breaths, inhale deeply through your nose. Exhale, sigh your breath away. A couple more, just like that. Allow the breath to flow sweetly without any control. Just notice how it's flowing. A lot of the postures that we do, like butterfly pose, we often don't do lying down. And what lying down does is it takes a lot of the low back tension out of the posture so that you're able to get the release through the hips, the adductors, hip flexors even, without finding that increase in tension in the lower back. Right? It's perhaps a gentler way to get into these postures. Just lets gravity do the work rather than needing to muscle it. A few more breaths here. And then slowly on your next inhale, draw your knees back. So essentially you can use your hands to help them, or maybe you heel into the feet out a little bit. And then take your feet mat width apart And do a little windshield wiper with the knees. And if there was any tension gathering in the low back here, this will help flush that out. And then take both knees over to the left, still with the feet mat width apart. So it's a bit of a spinal twist, but you might be feeling more in that right thigh, in that right hip. Right? This is a beautiful place to stay. Right? You can reach that right arm sort of back and over to the right a little bit. Some of you might choose to pick up the left ankle and hook it over top of the right thigh, sort of deepening. It's not sort of, quite a bit of deepening here. And then if you feel any tension in the low back as you do this, think of squeezing the butt on the right side. So it becomes a really active pose here. If you prefer the passive variation, then unhook the thigh or unhook the leg over the thigh and just keep the feet mat width apart. What squeezing the right butt does is it helps to open up through the hamstrings and the quadriceps on the right side. You might think, quads? How does squeezing the butt open the quads? Well, one of them, the rectus femoris, I believe. Gosh, now as soon as I've said that, I wonder if I'm right. Anyway, one of the 4 parts of the quadriceps crosses the hip as well as the knee and acts as a hip flexor as well as an extensor of the knee. Last couple breaths here. Good. If your foot is hooked over top, gently release it, bring it back to the mat, and then inhale the knees to the center, little wiggle or shake, and then both knees over to the right. Again, keeping the feet mat width apart. And always start with the gentle variation, because maybe you'll find more space, right? More ease with it. You can always, of course, choose to deepen it, but sometimes going easier on our bodies is a more profound practice. Maybe you reach the left arm back and behind you. You might gently cross the right ankle over top of the left thigh. Again, if you feel like you get low back tension when you do that, then you really need to squeeze the left butt. Even if you don't, you might choose to, or you can hang out here in a more passive variation or with the right foot on the floor. Wherever you need to go. Couple breaths. Another cool thing about this is that we very rarely get into internal rotation in yoga with the hips. Often it's about external rotation, right? Opening the feet out, turning the legs out. Whereas this, right now, your left leg, I'll get the hip anyways, internally rotated. So it stretches the muscles or work gets at them in a different way. Last breath here. If your right foot is hooked over top, gently release it, come back to center, and then hug both knees into your chest. You might draw circles with the knees here. Maybe they go in the same direction, or maybe they go in opposite directions, like egg beaters or frog legs. Excuse me, and then reach your legs up to the sky. Knees can be bent, right? So it doesn't have to be really active. You might start to shake out the legs or point and flex the ankles or draw circles with them. You could reach the arms up, but let the shoulder blades drape back to the floor. Again, you might draw circles with the wrists, point and flex or shake out, whatever you need to do. Last couple of breaths here. Good. And then bend your knees, bring your feet to the floor, hip width apart, parallel-ish, close enough into your hips or into your bum that you can tickle your heels with your fingertips. You're going to come into bridge pose. So press your feet into the floor slowly. Start to peel your spine up and away. Once you get to the top, pause there. And you can play with, lowering the bum a little bit or lifting it. Maybe really squeeze the butt to lift the hips up high. Maybe you walk onto the outside edge of the shoulders to get a little bit more lift through the chest as well. And then think of pressing your feet away from you. See how that activates the quads, right? The tops of the thighs. And then think of drawing the heels toward you. Oh, there's your butt and your hamstrings. Find a place in between those two. Last couple breaths here. And then exhale, gently release to the floor. Okay. One more set, press into the feet. Inhale, lift up. Option to stay here. Next option is to pick up the right leg. Cross the right ankle over top of the left thigh. Make sure that right hip doesn't drop down. So you want to really press the right foot into the thigh to lift that right hip up, perhaps even more. And then uncross, come back to center, pick up the left leg, cross it over top of the right. Think of then pressing the hips up. Press their left foot into the right thigh to find a little bit more lift. And then uncross. Exhale, lower down to the floor. Hug your knees into your chest. Little rock from side to side. And then maybe you rock and roll yourself up to seated. You could roll to one side and then come to a seated position. Shake out your legs a little bit. All right. So one thing that we don't do that often is a simple cross-legged stretch for the hips, right? Often we're here, or we're in figure four, or maybe we're in fire logs. But what I'd like you to do is just to find a simple cross legs, right? You don't want to be at the ankles. Ideally, the knees or the calves are resting on the heels. Now, I know that this might not be a perfectly comfortable position for you, and that's where this guy or your towel might come in handy. So then you sit up on it, and what it does is it tilts the pelvis forward, and it just gives your hips a little bit more of a release so that you don't have to work to be here. You can also have blocks propped underneath your knees or wherever feels good for you. And then from here, you're just going to think of lifting through the spine and then tilt forward on a long line. So think of sending your sit bones back as the spine comes forward on a long line. Now, if this feels all right on the lower back, on those hips, because you're probably feeling it into the glutes and the back of the hips, back of the thighs a little bit, or at least the outside edge, then you might start to round forward. Right? And just releasing into the spine a little bit more. Now, never worry about how deep you are in a stretch. We all have different imbalances and tightnesses. And also never judge how far you go in a stretch compared to the yoga teacher. Because most of us are hypermobile and probably shouldn't be able to go as deep as we go in some places. So it's all good. Just go till you feel a bearable, perhaps even delightful amount of tension, right? Getting the release. Right? You might have blocks that you can prop underneath your head. I kind of like sometimes bending my elbows and resting my hands on my head on my palms, almost in a prayer position. Last couple breaths. I like this one because it's a nice release for the low back as well as the hips. I don't know why we don't do this very often. I think maybe because it's not, I don't know. It doesn't look like an advanced pose, right? It doesn't look as sexy as doing pigeon. On your inhale, gently roll yourself back up. Send the weight back a little bit, uncross the legs, shake them out. We're going to go right away to the opposite side. So whatever leg was crossed in front on the first side, reverse it. You might have to cross your legs first the normal way that you would, and then find yourself pose again. And it can feel super weird depending on which leg is crossed in front of the other, right? For like right now, I feel like this is very strange, but that is a good feeling because it is a reminder that you should do that opposite crossing. Again, lift tall, come forward on a long line first. You can always stay here, right? Particularly if your low back feels tender, then you're still getting the release into the hips, right? If you would like to round forward, then maybe start to round forward. As gentle or as deep as you need to go. You can always prop underneath your forehead, taking some of the gravity out of it, particularly so that your neck doesn't have to do a lot of work to hold up the weight of your head. And as I said, it might not feel like much of a difference, and it can be quite subtle when you go from one side to the other, but it's worth it. It's worth doing that because one is slightly lifted, one is slightly lower, one has more deeper flexion, one has less flexion at the knee, so it's worth getting into. Last few breaths on this second side. And slowly inhale, come back up, unwind your legs. Excuse me, shake them out a little bit. Whatever you need to do. All right. Hope everyone is feeling well at this moment. Let's scooch around onto hands and knees. A little wiggle of the hips from side to side. And then if you have a pad or cushion, you might bring it underneath your left knee. And then step or sweep the right leg forward. We'll come up to half kneeling. Right. And as always, I'd love you to back out of the hips to start with. Hug the legs toward each other. Squeeze the bum on the left side, belly button to spine, shoulder blades on your back. And then maintaining all that, shift forward. So it's a really, really active release through the hip flexors. Through the front of the hip, right? Maybe you're getting into the quads as well. Excuse me. Right. And I prefer doing the stretches this way than the sort of deeper yoga thing because you end up, not always, often we end up in that deeper variation just hanging out in the ligaments and not getting a safe release of the muscles. Last couple breaths here. Okay. Exhale, shift your hips back, extending through the front leg, half splits. Hands could be on hips or maybe on blocks, or you might bring them to the floor. If you have a deeper variation of splits, then by all means slide out wherever you'd like to go. But make sure wherever you are that you're wrapping that right hip back as you wrap the left hip forward. And then it's almost as if you're trying to drag the front heel back toward you. And you probably feel that as soon as you do that. Flare the toes on the front foot, peel them back toward your face. Last couple breaths here. I really feel like I could go and do like an hour and a half long class on hips, not just half an hour. Inhale slowly, rock forward again. Bring your left hand or block or whatever you're using out a little bit wider and then sink through the hips a little bit. You might turn those front toes out and then you can gently press that front knee away from you. A little squeeze of the bum on the left leg again so you're not just hanging out in the hips. Hug the legs toward each other. Wrap that bottom shoulder onto your back. This is a beautiful place to stay. Some of you might choose, if it's available to you, and particularly if your hand, that bottom hand is lifted up a little bit, it gives you more space. You might reach around with the top hand for the grab of the back foot. And then you have two options here. One is to back out of the hips a little bit and keep the heel really hugging in toward the bum, or to shift the hips forward and kick the heel back. But the whole time, make sure that you're not on your kneecap, you're more on that thigh on the left side. And you keep squeezing the bum on the left side, hugging the legs toward each other. Last couple breaths here. And then slowly, gently release. Come back to hands and knees. If you're using a block or something like that. I want you to shuffle that back or the bottom knee so it's flush with the front edge of your block. And then you can use your hands to do this. Cross your right foot right in front of the left knee, toes to the floor, knee high. So if it goes all the way over here, you're going to lose a lot of the tension in the stretch. So toes right in front of the knee, and you want like a Barbie doll foot as much as possible. Send that right knee back and press the toes into the floor. So you might stay here, or you might feel like, I'm not really getting much of anything here, and that's probably most of you. So send the hips back as the upper body comes forward. And I'll show you from the side. Right? Hips back, upper body forward. And then you bow into it, and then hopefully you feel like you're getting a release into the glutes, into the hips on that right side. Possibly through the adductors as well if you're tight, if you've been doing a lot of squats. Last couple breaths here. And slowly, gently back out of it. Unwind your legs, come back. Ooh, hands and knees, little wiggle, little shake. And then if you're using a cushion, switch it to the opposite side. Step or sweep the left leg forward, come up to half kneeling, back out of the hips. Hug the legs toward each other, squeeze the bum, belly button to spine, then shift forward. Right shoulder blades on the back. Ground through the front heel so you have the stability, and then squeeze that right butt like crazy. You can just gently rest the palms on the front thigh, but even here if you wish, you might gently raise the arms up to the sky. Feels a little bit more like yoga, but also raising that right arm can help find more length on the right side of the body. You can play with back toes tucked or untucked. Keep squeezing that right bum though. Last couple breaths here. On your exhale, shift your hips back, extending through the front leg for half splits. Again, hands could be on hips, on blocks, or on the floor. By all means, if you have a deeper variation on this side, you're welcome to slide out. And you don't always have to go as deep on one side as you do in the other, because again, we have those imbalances in the body. One side might be tight and you might want to do it. One side might be really open and you don't need to. Wrap the right hip forward, draw the left hip back, belly button to spine, flare those front toes. And again, it's that sensation almost of dragging your front heel back toward you. Last couple breaths here. And slowly, gently inhale, rock forward again, back into that front foot. Take your right hand or block out a little bit wider. Turn the front toes out slightly, and then maybe you bring that left hand to the side. Make sure that bottom shoulder is not jutting forward. And sink through the hips a little bit. Squeeze the bum on the right leg. Maybe you reach around with the top arm for the grab of the back foot. Again, you might back out of the hips a little bit. Or maybe you sink through the hips, kicking the foot away. That can get into the top shoulder as well, which is quite nice. Whole time, feel that little hug of the legs back to the center line so you're not just hanging out in all of the joints. One more inhale. One sweet exhale. And then slowly unwind and back out of the hips. Again, shuffle or shift that bottom knee forward so it's front edge of your block or your pillow, whatever you're using. And then step the left toes in front of the right knee. Toes to the floor, left knee out wide. Right? And then try to, as much as possible, to stack your heel over the toes, and then shift your hips back as you walk your upper body forward. And then maybe you bow into it. Last couple breaths here. And slowly, gently press yourself back up. Unwind your legs. Shake it out a little bit. Okay, we're going to do one more pose before we come down to the floor. And this one can be super intense. So just be gentle with yourself, okay? You might need a little bit more padding for your knees, particularly if you're practicing on a hard floor like I am. So you can double up your mat. And then take your knees wide as feels good to start with. And then your shins go straight back behind you. Right? Turn the feet out, so the toes go out wide. This is frog pose. This might be enough for you. If you have a cushion or a pillow, then maybe you come down onto your forearms. Maybe some of you slide out. My pants are sticking a little bit wider. Again, never judge where you can go based on the yoga teacher. And if your hips are really far forward, you're not going to get much out of this aside from tension in the knees. So send your hips back. And then breathe, right? Notice how you react to moments of intensity. And that is one of the practices of yoga, is to notice that on the mat so that we can practice there. And then we can maybe temper our reactions off the mat as well. Last few breaths here, pretty intense groin stretch. You can always change the depth and make it easier or less sensational. Okay, to come out of it, slide your upper body forward and then splatter. Okay, gently walk your legs toward each other and then little reverse windshield wiper of the legs. All right. And then however works for you, I just don't want to knock over my books, come onto your back. A little hug of the knees toward each other. And let's end with a gentle twist. As always, I really like that. So maybe you shift your hips right to start with. As you exhale, lower your knees to the left. Right arm reaches out to the side. You might stay with knees stacked. Let your feet rest to the floor. You might choose to take a single leg twist, or maybe you cross your legs. Whatever feels good for you here today. As gentle or as deep as you need. With every exhale, though, imagine your right shoulder drifting further away from your right knee. I have not done frog in a very, very long time, so thank you for the request. Inhale back through center. Shift your hips over to the left maybe. Exhale, knees to the right. Left arm goes out to the side again, as gentle or as deep as you need. And if full frog was just too crazy intense, and it can be, I'm there with you, I get it. You might do it one leg at a time. So laying down on your belly, just bring one leg up to the side, keep the other leg extended, and that can be a much more gentle way to get into it. Again, using gravity rather than the full weight of your body. I mean, they both use gravity, but it's less because you're using less mass. Inhale back to center. Reset your spine and your pelvis. And then hug both knees into your chest. Little rock from side to side. Take your knees wide out toward your shoulders or armpits. This is a fantastic place to stay. If you'd like to, maybe kick your feet to the sky, grab the back of the thighs, outside the legs, ankles, or feet for happy baby. It's kind of like frog pose, right? But now it takes it takes the gravity or the weight of the body out of it. And it's slightly different because it's not nearly so deep of external rotation. But you're definitely getting into those adductors again. And then gently release. You have a few options for your rest. Again, you can go wherever you would like to go. Might feel really good though to rest if you heel into your feet apart so that they're mat width apart or wider, and let the knees hang in toward each other. And this will just take all the tension out of the hips. It helps release through the sacrum as well a little bit. It's a beautiful place to stay. You might choose to rest on your side or in child's pose or a seated meditation, and wherever feels good for you. And for 3 breaths, inhale deeply through your nose. Exhale, sigh your breath away. Couple more. Continue breathing however you need to, whether it's in and out through your nose or your mouth. Notice how your breath is flowing. Let go of the breath control. And let go of any muscle tension or gripping. And stay here as long as you can, as long as you would like to. 5, 10 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Namaste.